that your teacher?
Okay, and we will start our story. So as I said, I think we've just got 4 chapters left. So I think we'll try and finish it today, because I, for one, need to know what happens to Mr. Fox. Where's he going to? And do they all get to have their amazing feast? And do the farmers ever find them? These are things I need to know. So let's get started and we can find out what happens today. So this was where we left it yesterday, with the small foxes just pushing the trolley with all the, I think it was the ducks and the geese on the trolley. So they're pushing all of those back to the fox's burrow for a fantastic feast. And we've got 4 chapters left, so I will start straight away. So chapter 14, Badger has doubts. "Just one more visit," cried Mr. Fox. "And I'll bet I know where that will be," said the only small fox now left. He was the smallest fox of them all. "Where?" said Badger. "Well," said the smallest fox, "we've been to Boggis and we've been to Bunce, but we haven't been to Bean. It must be Bean." "You are right," said Mr. Fox, "but what you don't know is which part of Bean's place we are about to visit." "Which?" they said together. "Aha," said Mr. Fox. "Just you wait and see." They were digging as they talked. The tunnel was going forward fast. Suddenly Badger said, "Doesn't this worry you just a tiny bit, Foxy?" "Worry me?" said Mr. Fox. "What?" "All this stealing." Mr. Fox stopped digging and stared at Badger as though he had gone completely dotty. "My dear old furry frump," he said, "do you know anyone in the whole world who wouldn't swipe a few chickens if his children were starving to death?" There was a short silence while Badger thought deeply about this. "You are far too respectable," said Mr. Fox. "There's nothing wrong with being respectable," Badger said. "Look," said Mr. Fox, "Boggis and Bunce and Bean are out to kill us. You realise that, I hope?" "I do, Foxy, I do indeed," said the gentle Badger. "But we're not going to stoop to their level. We don't want to kill them." "I should hope not indeed," said Badger. "We wouldn't dream of it," said Mr. Fox. "We shall simply take a little food here and there to keep us and our families alive, right?" "I suppose we'll have to," said Badger. "If they want to be horrible, let them," said Mr. Fox. "We down here are decent, peace-loving people." Badger laid his head on one side and smiled at Mr. Fox. "Foxy," he said, "I love you." "Thank you," said Mr. Fox. "And now let's get on with the digging." 5 minutes later, Badger's front paws hit against something flat and hard. "What on earth is this?" he said. "It looks like a solid stone wall." He and Mr. Fox scraped away the soil. It was a wall, but it was built of bricks, not stones. The wall was right in front of them, blocking their way. "Now, who in the world would build a wall under the ground?" asked Badger. "Very simple," said Mr. Fox. "It's the wall of an underground room. And, if I am not mistaken, it is exactly what I'm looking for." Chapter 15, Bean's Secret Cider Cellar. Mr. Fox examined the wall carefully. He saw that the cement between the bricks was old and crumbly, so he loosened a brick without much trouble and pulled it away. Suddenly, out from the hole where the brick had been, there popped a small, sharp face with whiskers. "Go away!" it snapped. "You can't come in here. It's private." "Good Lord!" said Badger. "It's Rat!" "You saucy beast," said Mr. Fox. "I should have guessed we'd find you down here somewhere." "Go away!" shrieked Rat. "Go on, beat it. This is my private pitch." "Shut up," said Mr. Fox. "I will not shut up," shrieked Rat. "This is my place. I got here first." Mr. Fox gave a brilliant smile, flashing his white teeth. "My dear Rat," he said softly, "I am a hungry fellow, and if you don't hop it quickly, I shall eat you up in one gulp." That did it. Rat popped back fast out of sight. Mr. Fox laughed and began pulling more bricks out of the wall. Ha ha ha! When he had made a biggish hole, he crept through it. Badger and the smallest fox followed him in. They found themselves in a vast, damp, gloomy cellar. Can you see what's in the cellar? This is it, cried Mr. Fox. This is what? Said Badger. This place is empty. Where are the turkeys? Asked the smallest fox, staring into the gloom. I thought Bean was a turkey man. He is a turkey man, said Mr. Fox. But we're not after turkeys now. We've got plenty of food. Then what do we need, Dad? Take a good look round, said Mr. Fox. Don't you see anything that interests you? Badger and the smallest fox peered into the half-darkness. As their eyes became accustomed to the gloom, they began to see what looked like a whole lot of big glass jars standing upon shelves around the walls. They went closer. They were jars. There were hundreds of them, and upon each one was written the word cider. The smallest fox leaped high in the air. Oh, Dad, he cried out, look what we found! It's cider! Exactly, shouted Mr. Fox. Tremendous, shouted Badger. Bean's secret cider cellar, said Mr. Fox. But go carefully, my dears, don't make a noise. This cellar is right underneath the farmhouse itself. Cider, said Badger, is especially good for badgers. We take it as medicine, 1 large glass 3 times a day with meals and another at bedtime. It will make the feast into a banquet, said Mr. Fox. While they were talking, the smallest fox had sneaked a jar off the shelf and taken a gulp. Wow, he gasped. Wowee! You must understand, this was not the ordinary weak fizzy cider one buys in a store. It was the real stuff. A home-brewed, fiery liquor that burned in your throat and boiled in your stomach. Ah, 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 gasped the smallest fox. This is some cider. That's quite enough of that, said Mr. Fox, grabbing the jar and putting it to his own lips. He took a tremendous gulp. It's miraculous, he whispered, fighting for breath. It's fabulous, it's beautiful. It's my turn, said Badger, taking the jar and tilting his head well back. The cider gurgled and bubbled down his throat. It's like melted gold, he gasped. Oh, Foxy, it's like drinking sunbeams and rainbows. You're poaching, shrieked Rat. Put that down at once, there'll be none left for me. Rat was perched upon the highest shelf in the cellar, peering out from behind a huge jar. There was a small rubber tube inserted in the neck of the jar, and Rat was using this tube to suck out the cider. You're drunk, said Mr. Fox. Mind your own business, shrieked Rat, and if you great clumsy brutes come messing about in here, we'll all be caught. Get out, and leave me to sip my cider in peace. At that moment, they heard a woman's voice coming out in the house above them. Hurry up and get that cider, Mabel, the voice called. You know Mr. Bean doesn't like to be kept waiting, especially when he's been out all night in a tent. The animals froze. They stayed absolutely still. Their ears pricked, their bodies tense. Then they heard the sound of a door being opened. The door was at the top of a flight of stone steps leading down from the house to the cellar. And now someone was starting to come down those steps. Oh, who could it be? Chapter 16, The Woman. Quick, said Mr. Fox, hide! He and Badger and the smallest fox jumped onto a shelf and crouched behind a row of big cider jars. Peering around the jars, they saw a huge woman coming down into the cellar. At the foot of the steps, the woman paused, looking to right, then left. Then she turned and headed straight for the place where Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox were hiding. She stopped right in front of them. The only thing between her and them was a row of cider jars. She was so close, Mr. Fox could hear the sound of her breathing. Peeping through the crack between 2 bottles, he noticed that she carried a big rolling pin in one hand. How many will you want this time, Mrs. Bean? The woman shouted, and from the top of the stairs the other voice called back, Bring up 2 or 3 jars. You drank 4 yesterday, Mrs. Bean. Yes, but he won't want that many today because he's not going to be up there more than a few hours longer. He says the fox is bound to make a run for it this morning. It can't possibly stay down that hole another day without food. The woman in the cellar reached out and lifted a jar of cider from the shelf. The jar she took was next but one to the jar behind which Mr. Fox was crouching. Well, you can see them. You see them hiding here, behind the jars. I'll be glad when the rotten brute is killed and strung up on the front porch, he called out. And by the way, Mrs. Bean, your husband promised I could have the tail as a souvenir. The tail's been all shot to pieces, said the voice from upstairs. Didn't you know that? You mean it's ruined? Of course it's ruined. They shot the tail but missed the fox. Oh, heck, said the big woman. I did so want that tail. You can have the head instead, Mabel. You can get it stuffed and hang it on your bedroom wall. Hurry up now with that cider. Yes, Ma'am, I'm coming, said the big woman, and she took a second jar from the shelf. She takes one more, she'll see us, thought Mr. Fox. He could feel the smallest fox's body pressed tightly against his own, quivering with excitement. Will 2 be enough, Mrs. Bean, or shall I take 3? My goodness, Mabel, I don't care as long as you get a move on. Then 2 it is, said the huge woman, speaking to herself now. He drinks too much anyway. Carrying a jar in each hand, with the rolling pin tucked under one arm, she walked away across the cellar. At the foot of the steps, she paused and looked round again, sniffing the air. There's rats down here again, Mrs. Bean. I can smell them. Then poison them, woman, poison them. You know where the poison's kept. Yes, ma'am, Mabel said. She climbed slowly out of sight up the steps. The door slammed. Quick, said Mr. Fox. Grab a jar each and run for it. Rat stood on his high shelf and shrieked. What did I tell you? You nearly got nabbed, didn't you? You nearly gave the game away. You keep out of here from now on. I don't want you around. This is my place. You, said Mr. Fox, are going to be poisoned. Poppycock, said Rat. I sit up here and watch her putting the stuff down. She'll never get me. Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox ran across the cellar, clutching a gallon jar each. Goodbye, Rats, they called out as they disappeared through the hole in the wall. Thanks for the lovely cider. Thieves, shrieked Rat. Robbers, bandits, burglars. Chapter 17, The Great Feast. Oh, yes, they've made it back. Back in the tunnel, they paused so that Mr. Fox could bring up the hole in the wall. He was humming to himself as he put the bricks back in place. I can still taste that glorious cider, he said. What an impudent fellow Rat is. He has bad manners, Badger said. All rats have bad manners. I've never met a polite rat yet. And he drinks too much, said Mr. Fox, putting the last brick in place. There we are. Now home, to the feast. They grabbed their jars of cider and off they went. Mr. Fox was in front, the smallest fox came next, and Badger last. Along the tunnel they flew, past the turning that led to Bunce's mighty storehouse, past Boggus's chicken house number 1, and then up the long stretch towards the place where they knew Mrs. Fox would be waiting. Keep it up, my darlings, shouted Mr. Fox. We'll soon be there. Think what's waiting for us at the other end, and just think what we're bringing home with us in these jars. That ought to cheer up poor Mrs. Fox. Mr. Fox sang a little song as he ran. Oh, I won't sing. I don't want to traumatise you. Home again, swiftly I glide, back to my beautiful bride. She'll not feel so rotten as soon as she's gotten some cider inside her inside. Then Badger joined in. Oh, poor Mrs. Badger, he cried, so hungry she very near died. But she'll not feel so hollow if only she'll swallow some cider inside her inside. They were still singing as they rounded the final corner and burst in upon the most wonderful and amazing sight any of them had ever seen. The feast was just beginning. A large dining room had been hollowed out of the earth, and in the middle of it, seated around a huge table, were no less than 29 animals. They were Mrs. Fox and 3 small foxes, Mrs. Badger and 3 small badgers, Mole and Mrs. Mole and 4 small moles, Rabbit and Mrs. Rabbit and the 5 small rabbits, Weasel and Mrs. Weasel and 6 small weasels. The table was covered with chickens and ducks and geese and hams and bacon, and everyone was tucking into the lovely food. Oh, just look at all that spread. How delicious. My darling, cried Mrs. Fox, jumping up and hugging Mr. Fox. We couldn't wait. Please forgive us. Then she hugged the smallest fox of all, and Mrs. Badger hugged Badger, and everyone hugged everyone else. Amid shouts of joy, the great jars of cider were placed upon the table, and Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox sat down with the others. You must remember, no one had eaten a thing for several days. They were ravenous. So for a while, there was no conversation at all. There was only the sound of crunching and chewing as the animals attacked the succulent food. At last, Badger stood up. He raised his glass of cider and called out, "A toast! I want you all to stand and drink a toast to our dear friend who has saved our lives this day, Mr. Fox." "To Mr. Fox," they all shouted, standing up and raising their glasses. "To Mr. Fox, long may he live." Then Mrs. Fox got shyly to her feet and said, "I don't want to make a speech. I just want to say one thing, and it is this. My husband is a fantastic fox." Everyone clapped and cheered. Woo! Yeah! Then Mr. Fox himself stood up. "This delicious meal," he began. Then he stopped. In the silence that followed, he let fly a tremendous belch. I can't really do a belching sound. It's like, oh. There was laughter and more clapping. Yay! "This delicious meal, my friends," he went on, "is by courtesy of Mrs. Boggis, Bunce and Bean." More cheering and laughter. "And I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have." He let out another colossal belch. "Better out than in," said Badger. "Thank you," said Mr. Fox, grinning hugely. "But now, my friends, let us be serious. Let us think of tomorrow and the next day and the days after that. If we go out, we will be killed, right?" "Right," they shouted. "We'll be shot before we've gone a yard," said Badger. "Exactly," said Mr. Fox. "But who wants to go out anyway? Let me ask you that. We are all diggers, every one of us. We hate the outside. The outside is full of enemies. We only go out because we have to get food for our families. But now, my friends, we have an entirely new setup. We have a safe tunnel leading to 3 of the finest stores in the world." "We do indeed," said Badger. "I've seen them." "And you know what this means," said Mr. Fox. "It means that none of us need ever go out into the open again." There was a buzz of excitement around the table. "I therefore invite you all," Mr. Fox went on, "to stay here with me forever." "Forever!" they cried. "My goodness, how marvellous," said Rabbit. And Rabbit said to Mrs. Rabbit, "My dear, just think, we're never going to be shot at again in our lives." "We will make," said Mr. Fox, "a little underground village with streets and houses on every side, separate houses for badgers and moles and rabbits and weasels and foxes. And every day I will go shopping for you all, and every day we will eat like kings." The cheering that followed this speech went on for many minutes. Oh, look, there's the picture of them all cheering. They're so happy, aren't they? Final chapter. Outside, chapter 18, Still Waiting. Outside the fox's hole, Boggis and Bunce and Bean sat beside their tents with their guns on their laps. It was beginning to rain. Water was trickling down the necks of the 3 men and into their shoes. "He won't stay down there much longer now," Boggis said. "The brute must be famished," Bunce said. "That's right," Bean said. "He'll be making a dash for it at any moment. Keep your guns handy." They sat there by the hole, waiting for the fox to come out. And, so far as I know, they are still waiting. And here they are, still waiting. Wow, what a great story. I think you should be able to speak now. Who enjoyed Fantastic Mr. Fox?
Me.
Me, I loved it. And tomorrow's story will be a time tomorrow, so it'll be a bit different. So instead of me reading a story, we'll have a bit of a chat and play some games instead. I'm not sure if it's going to. I think it's still going to be me. Oh, Amelia's pleased about that. I think it's still going to be me tomorrow, but it might be Mrs. Ward. I'm not sure yet. But either way, it'll still be really fun. So there'll be some games and some chatting tomorrow, so we'll get to have a turn. You will come back for some game, some Zoom. Aben's back. Ziwa's back. Who else is back? I think, oh, Bill's back. Molly's back. Amy's back. Merrilee's is back. I think that's Joseph back and Lawrence back. Well done. And Rosabella and Ziwa are back tomorrow. Yes. I'm excited. Seb's back tomorrow. Brilliant. Well, I'm excited. I'll get thinking of some good games we can play on Zoom because it is a bit trickier. Look, I've got to change my background to be a picture of the feast. So there they are, enjoying their feast. I thought I'd take the place of Mr. Fox. But I really hope to see you tomorrow and have a lovely rest of the day. I think I might go and have a Solero now, an ice lolly. Bit of a treat, an afternoon treat. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. Let's all say goodbye.
Bye. Bye.